now this third section, narrator as magician. The recorder cut me off, but that pretty much was the end of the Celine section, so we got that. Narrator as magician, this is an interesting issue because the novelist is in essentially the position of handling this incredibly toxic chunk of memory, which is why I wanted you to hear some Celine, and just to be experienced or to be exposed to a little bit of Celine, because he was a very, very famous writer, and yeah, for a while everybody read Celine. Despite the anti-Semitism, because the writing was so important. It sort of has the same kind of clout, and at the time it had the same kind of clout as Samuel Beckett. Did I say Samuel Beckett? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Samuel Beckett, the French playwright. Sorry, yeah, Samuel Beckett, who wrote famously "Waiting for Godot" and "Not I" and "Happy Days" and a number of other plays. And if you haven't seen any Beckett, I do recommend it. You should be able to find some Beckett on YouTube. If you can find some Beckett with Billy Whitlaw, she's astonishing. Oh God. Anyway, it's very, very it's modern. It was avant-garde, and so is Celine. Anyway, so we're here at what is sorting out what O'Brien would call the story truth from the happening truth, and you can see now where it can be helpful to have these O'Brien categories. You're like, oh yes, okay, my old friend, my old friends, the story truth and the happening truth. Because you have to somehow stabilize the experiences that have been had by the been experienced basically by the civilian or by the person involved, and make them visible. And then you have to find a way to pass those experiences on using language, which is going to be tough. And Vonnegut says this right away on page 2, or his narrator does anyway. I thought it would be easy for me to write about the destruction of Dresden, since all I would have to do would be to report what I had seen. I thought, too, that it would be a masterpiece, or at least make me a lot of money, since the subject was so big. And, of course, it is a masterpiece, and it does make him a lot of money. But he doesn't know that, right? He doesn't know this is going to happen. He is about to be a star because of this book. And when he goes on to write Breakfast of Champions, which will come out in 1973, 72, he will become a literary giant in the United States, and will never want for anything again, basically, in terms of money. But this issue, as he says, I thought it would be easy for me to write about destruction, since all I would have to be to report on what I had seen. Aha, the happening truth. I'll just tell it. But as we know from O'Brien's situation, this is not easy at all. It may be the toughest thing to do. So the recounting is a struggle, and he begins to talk about this issue of how do you recount something. And on page 22, he brings up the story of Lot and his wife. And why are so many references to the Bible? The thing is that most novels of the 20th century, even the late 20th century, from America and Canada, expect the reader will have some basic knowledge of the Bible. It's just sort of a shared construct, effectively. It may be puzzling to you, if you're not familiar with the Bible, to come up against these references and think, what is that screwy reference? And I faced the same thing. I went to a public school, and I didn't have any religious background or anything at all, for which I'm grateful, because it, for me, is just another way of making it hard to see what is around us. But I did realize that I was going to need some kind of sort of basic understanding of what happens in the Bible, what are the important stories, and so on. Anyway, so this, your friend Google will tell you. So if you get a situation like this on page 22 and you're not sure what the reference is, Google it. Just look it up. Or you can get a concordance to the Bible, which I recommend, or a dictionary of the Bible, which I do recommend that, actually. So here's Lot's wife, and this is a reference to Sodom and Gomorrah, the two cities of the plain, which God says, stop. I've talked about this, stop doing what you're doing. I'm going to come down and smite you. And and they carry on doing what they're doing. So God's like, all right, that's it. I'm gonna burn the cities, and he tells Lot and his wife, okay, you can go and warn them, but if they don't listen to you, get out of the city because I'm gonna wipe it all out. And Lot does. He does warn them, and people are like, whatever, we're having fun. We're not we're not leaving. And he leaves with his wife, and he warns his wife that God has told him not to look back. And well, why not, right? Because they will see something presumably which is horrific, a burning, the burning of two cities, and this public burning of two cities like this, which in the words of the Bible is actually a Holocaust, because a Holocaust is actually a burnt offering to God. A Holocaust is usually really like you take a goat and you slaughter the goat and then you burn it and make an offering to God. This is the Old Testament. So if you burn a whole city, it's an offering to God. Well, what other city gets burned in this novel? It's like, oh yeah, Dresden gets burned, right? So when Vonnegut chooses a narrative, a story here, he's choosing very carefully because he's a minimalist. He's not a maximalist like David Foster Wallace and these people who write 12,000 page books. He's writing 150 pages, 180 pages, little tiny thin books that say everything, but they say everything in like 2 lines, 3 lines here, 2 lines there. They're little minimalist packages of information. But she did look back, says Vonnegut, and that's true. Lot's wife, they go out of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they go out of Sodom, I think it is. And Lot says, don't look back, don't look back. And there's this massive screaming and noise of the burning behind them. And she turns around and looks back. And God turns her into a pillar of salt. And so that's it, right? Because if you look back, then you're going to see what you shouldn't see. And so that's what happens. Well, but she did look back, says Vonnegut. And I love her for that because it was so human. And this is true. Just try not looking at a disaster as you pass it on the highway. Somebody in the hospital, you've got your own trouble in the hospital, and you see somebody else go past, and you're like, I wonder what happened to them. It's like this, what it is to be a human being, is to wonder, why are people suffering? How bad is it? Is it worse than my suffering? Do they need help? And so on. So she was turned into a pillar of salt, so it goes. And you'll see that every time somebody dies in the novel, he uses the phrase, so it goes. Well, why? Right? People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I finished my war book now. The next one I'll write is going to be fun. This one is a failure, and it had to be since it was, after all, written by a pillar of salt on page 22. So he's looking back. And there's this sense, especially in America in the 50s and 60s, that you didn't look back. What that produced, arguably, was the problem of Vietnam. I would certainly be happy with that argument. But during the 50s, when Vonnegut was sort of slaving to make a living, selling his stories to slick magazines, mostly things like Good Housekeeping and Chatelaine and Red Book, those kinds of things, Glamour. Nostalgia was not really encouraged because you weren't to look back. You were to only look ahead. The future was what was calling America. And you will often still hear this, that it's not a good idea to look back. And he has this discussion with Harrison Starr on page 3, who says, is it an anti-war book? Yes, I said, I guess. You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing an anti-war books? No, what do you say, Harrison Starr? I say, why don't you write an anti-glacier book instead, on page 3. So, in effect, this is the position that Vonnegut takes. It has to be done. You can be crushed by the war, but it still has to be done.